Welcome to the Business and Leadership Channel. My name is Michelle Boulay, and I'm so honored to be a sponsor here at this amazing conference because it's my passion to help you connect to your own inner leader and let that transform the businesses and relationships you create. I'm a life coach and healer and an internationally recognized award-winning dance artist. And dancing taught me to listen to my own inner voice and let that guide me to my success. A very common thing that happens for business owners, creatives, and leaders is that you're so close to your next goal or breakthrough and then you stop. Doubt kicks in, worry, procrastination, fear, overwhelm, which kill growth in your business and creative process. So I'm giving a talk here on Saturday, October 24th, where you'll learn tools so that you can show up with clarity and belief in yourself and your ideas, consistency to keep showing up, and the embodied and intellectual understanding to move you gracefully through the challenges you'll meet as you grow, as you go for your goals. If you can't make it live, pick up your phone now, go to Instagram or Facebook, find me, follow me, and DM me the word success, and I'll send you the free resource I'll be sharing at my presentation. It's also in the show notes. However, I do recommend you attend live here or at my main stage presentation to get the full scope of what I'll be sharing to help you realize your creative dreams. And now, please enjoy this next presentation.
Okay, I already introduced Peter. I'm going to hand over to Peter. He's going to bring the presentation. He's an amazing author. He is I really love the human being and social innovator. And he will bring the embodiment of everything to us. Okay, Peter, to you.
Thank you, Monica. That's quite a challenge to bring the embodiment of everything, but I'll do my best.
I know.
So great. Good to be here and welcome everybody in the present and future. So I'm going to share a little story first, and then we'll probably have a decent amount of time for some interaction because I'm making really one main key point in this, and then I expect so we'll be able to go into some discussion afterwards. So why the body is the key to our future? Slightly different subtitle to the one I had before, but as I was preparing it, I was thinking, yeah, it's really got this essence to it. It's kind of weird in a way to be having an embodiment conference that's so popular, or for there to be so much work around embodiment when we're already in a body. So how come we're having to somehow apparently relearn getting into our body when we're in a body? And we know how critical that is. So what happened that took us out of our body? That means we have to relearn getting into our body. And why is that so important? So yeah, from nearly headless Nick there through to this fully embodied human being. All right, well, we're going to take a big perspective on this. Some of you might recognize this, others won't, so I'll just talk us through it for a minute. This is essentially the story of human development over time, based on the spiral dynamics model. Those of you who are familiar with integral theory will also be aware of. And in this image, it's integrated both the individual development along this pathway, the cultural development, and the social and structural development. So you can see that basically a bit like in Maslow's pyramid, we've gone through these phases of survival and then into a phase which was more about belonging and safety, more in the tribal contexts. And then at this red system, the sense of separate self emerges that we could call the ego, and along with feudal empires and attempted domination of the world around us. And then we try to bring in more structure and order to that through this blue mythic order system. And then on the basis of those rules that have been established, we start to play this scientific, rational, market-driven game of progress. And then we tire of that and find ourselves in this place where we're realizing there's more to life than just a bigger car and a better house, that we start to become more sensitive to ourselves, to the world around us, to other people. And then we hit this point where we realize that the life conditions we're facing are extremely complex and potentially threatening to the survival of humanity. And we take a step back and we try to work out how are we going to connect up all the dots so that we can actually have a future together. And then at the final stage, at this turquoise stage, we surrender, in a way, our cognitive efforts to work it all out and tune in at a deeper level to the nature of reality and become more integrated in that reality that up until now we've been trying to work on. So this, looking at this story of our development over time, in the early stages there, in the beige and purple stages, we were just in our body, we weren't thinking about it. So what happened that has somehow made us now end up in this place where we're so passionate about embodiment? I mean, if we hadn't somehow lost that, then we wouldn't be asking this question and we wouldn't be having this very popular conference. So here's the same picture, just organized slightly different. The reason, by the way, to go back, this is structured and designed in this way is because it shows that you always have a broader base of the earlier value systems that the next ones build on top of. So if you were to pull out the bottom ones, the whole thing would collapse, which is a very important point we'll come to later on. So there's always more of the earlier stages because you've gone through them, right, to get to the later stages. So that's why this image is structured in that way. Now, I spent a while working with somebody called Dylan Newcomb, who I'm sure a number of you will be familiar of his work at Uzazu. Where we were looking at basic energy dynamics related to sound and to movement. And he had discovered with his workshops with hundreds of dancers going through them that 8 basic energy dynamics showed up around 8 core sounds and 8 different movements. And then when you added a breath to them, in and out breath, you got 16 different energy dynamics, essentially. And he asked me to come and help him to explore with these dancers how these energy dynamics related to the spiral and in terms of this developmental cycle. And we found some very interesting things. Now, these circles you can see are yin-yang representations. So they're based on the I Ching dynamics, where at a maximum you've got basically 4 different dynamics going on here. So 4 levels of yin-yang, for example. And these were the basic energies and movements that the dancers related to as they went through these value systems. So it was a series of 4. But the fascinating thing about it, as we looked at it and looked at the dancers' experiences, was that it didn't just go from one to the next one and then just keep going with different kinds of energy dynamics. But if you look carefully at the midpoint there between the orange and blue systems, those energy dynamics have mirrored themselves. So there's been a kind of flip in the system where you get, for example, at orange, the same fundamental energy dynamics that you get at blue, but in a slightly more subtle way. Likewise, we found that the green value system reflected the energy dynamics at red, and purple with yellow, and turquoise with beige. The main difference being that the higher value systems were a more subtle reflection of the earlier energy dynamics. So something was going on here that was telling us that human development is less linear than we think it is, and that there are relationships between earlier phases and later phases of development that haven't really been explored up until now. The key aspect of this that will bring me to this question of embodiment and what happened to the body is if you look at the first two and the higher two levels, so beige and purple and yellow and turquoise, they both have as their foundation an internal perspective where the basic assumption is one of interconnectedness. That's the foundational tone, you could say, of each of those four value systems. Whereas the four central ones are more externally focused and have a focus on differentiation, difference between things. Now, that's very important because what we start to see is that the kind of ways of thinking, the value systems that are needed now to deal with the global challenges that we're facing are requiring the complexity up at these yellow and turquoise systems, and that they have a fundamentally different quality than the value systems that we're used to in our civilization, from the red value system up through to the green value system, which has been primarily focused on differentiation and taking things apart, whereas now it's focusing on interconnectedness. And the only experience we have to draw on that comes from our precognitive experience down at beige and purple. So my exploration was around my PhD research, and the thesis that I ended up coming up with was that something fundamentally traumatic happened in this shift from the early two internally focused systems as the sense of separate self emerged at the red value system. In healthy development, one transcends and includes previous phases of development. So to move from one phase to another phase, you have to push away from it a little bit. You have to differentiate out so that you've got the space for the next phase to come in. But then you reintegrate the best of it from the past as you move forward. Now, in psychological terms, what happens if you don't just differentiate, but disassociate from the previous system, so disidentify with where you have been before, is that you push that past into your shadow and it doesn't become integrated into your development. And then it keeps basically tugging at you for the rest of your life until you pay attention to it and go back to whatever pain it was that created that split and reintegrate it in yourself. It creates an instability in the rest of your development. And when it happens at such an early phase as this, which in childhood is normally around 2 to 3, like the emergence of red in childhood is when the child starts saying me, starts to get this sense of separate self. And our collective development was when we went from hunter-gatherer, really, and tribal-based societies up into these feudal empires and then into the religion-dominated eras, is that instead of transcending and including these early phases of beige and purple, for some reason, we transcended and repressed. So we weren't able to go through this act of sense of separate self emerging that can see itself as different and see the differences in other things around it. We weren't able to remember, literally put back together, our previous experience of precognitive interconnectedness. And you can see this in, for example, the witch burnings that took place in Europe, because the witches, which was a positive term early on, were people who had a direct connection to the earth, who were able to actually do healing in working with energy and the knowledge of the earth. So had a deep interconnected sense of it, were able to access wisdom directly, which was a threat to the church, which came in and wanted to put in place a hierarchical system where truth was out there, was disembodied out of the earth, put in an external authority, and then a hierarchy was put in place of people who were validated to be able to translate that truth and deliver it to the people in the sense of the priests. So anyone who had direct access to truth through their wisdom, their bodies, the connection to the earth, as the witches did, were a threat to that. And that is why that so many of them ended up getting burned. So we have, certainly coming from the West, is my thesis, a collective trauma at this point of our development. And the key thing is that in beige and purple, these early stages, the body was primary. The body was our main sense. We weren't sitting around thinking about things or discussing them with each other. We were experiencing life, and we were experiencing it as interconnected. We were highly alert to everything that was going on about us. And it was only in the next stage that the self-awareness emerged, along with abstract cognitive thought. And interestingly enough, along with linear time, which is a temporary phenomena, because before that point, we experience time much more in the present and in much more of a cyclical way. So I'm going to share with you a few quotes from Ken Wilber, because he describes it so beautifully, what goes on here, that it's really essential for us to get, because in my experience, this is the core of our human challenge at the moment, and it's directly related to our relationship with our bodies. So Ken says in Up from Eden, the ego, in the necessary course of its emergence, had to break free of the great mother, a feat represented in all the hero myths. But in its zeal to assert its independence, it not only transcended the great mother, so our relationship to the earth, which was desirable, it also repressed the great mother, which was disastrous. It's one thing to gain freedom from nature, emotions, instinct, and the environment. It's quite another to alienate them. The Western ego did not just gain its freedom from the Great Mother, it severed its deep interconnectedness with her. We failed to reintegrate our experience of relationship to the earth and the rest of life. It became an object with no intersubjective relationship, which is why we have been able to do what we've been able to do to the earth without regret over the last period of time, and exploit the earth in the way that we have and create the conditions that we're currently in. He goes on to say, and here the body comes in, since nature stroke body, right? So when we transcended, we were really pushing away from the body, the nature, and the feminine in the broadest sense was all made to be part of something that needed to be controlled, that was essentially seen as evil and dangerous. We had to kind of go beyond, transcend the material. Since nature and body is the referent of seasonal time, so it was cyclical, and the mind is the referent of historical time, linear time, the severance, the separation of the mind from the body meant a corresponding severance of history from nature, right? Mind, linear time, history, body, presence, nature. Once the ego was cut loose from seasonal nature and from the body, it has no felt roots in which to ground its otherwise higher order awareness. No felt roots. This is really important, because that means that our future development is basically unstable and wobbly because we don't have a grounded rootedness in the history of where we've come from. It then seemed perfectly acceptable to the ego to begin a premeditated assault upon nature, regardless of the historical consequences of such activity, because history and nature were no longer integrated. Likewise, the ego failed to comprehend that an attack upon nature was already an attack upon its own body, so that the whole project was, in the deepest and truest sense, finally suicidal. If we just take that in for a minute, that separation has meant that we've been able to poison the earth in the way that we have, but also poison our own bodies. I mean, what other species feeds itself with all this unhealthy things? Why would any sensible, intelligent, whole animal feed itself with things that do anything other than vitalize its body? So that shows the depth of our disconnection from the earth and from our own body. And Ken summarizes with this beautiful line. When the great mother is repressed, the great goddess is concealed. This means we don't get access to those higher levels of interconnectedness, the realms of intuition and subtle energy, until we have integrated our relationship with the great mother, with those earlier value systems down at beige and purple. They are interconnected with each other. We don't get one without the other. And he says, one may, it's a terrible realization, look in vain through the Judeo-Christian Islamic religion, the Abrahamic religions, for any authentic trace of the higher touch of the subtle goddess herself. And so the lack of that, the lack of the presence of the goddess, the presence of the feminine in that way, he says, would become a perfect and terrifying comment on an entire civilization. So that traumatic shift where we transcended but failed to wrap around and re-include, pushed away from the body, from the earth, from the feminine, is marking our civilization in the way that we are now facing a challenge to deal with these ecological, social, psycho-spiritual problems that we're facing, that at their core are about reintegrating a felt sense of interconnectedness. So a little bit more on the nature of these phases and how they have defined the core elements of how we experience life and reality. So in these pre-cognitive phases, time was essentially cyclical, non-linear, and you were present. You were present in your body, aware, highly aware of the world around you for your own survival needs. And you noticed cycles of seasons. So linearity didn't come in until later. Like, we didn't learn to plant things to then reap the reward for the future, to harvest for the future, until a later stage. At the moment, it was hunter-gatherer now. Thought at that point was direct and instinctual. There wasn't abstract thought. It was instant, in the moment. Language was concrete. It was directly related to things we could see around us. It connected us to the world around us. Space was seen as one, as alive, not cognitively, experienced as. And the body was the key priority, right? To stay alive. It was the main sensing organ of the world around us. Post the split, time became linear. And this isn't necessarily a negative thing. These elements that emerge now, they become problematic when you fail to reintegrate these previous phases that are lower down. So linearity and understanding of evolution over time is not necessarily a bad thing. But when we forget the cyclical and non-linear element, then and we allow our mind to become separate from the body, then we find ourselves spending most of our time in the future and in the past, either worrying about something that we've done in the past or being concerned about something that's going to happen in the future. And that mind taking us away from actually being present in the body. Thought becomes abstract. You talk about things that you can't even see or become aware of around us. Language supports that. Language becomes an abstraction of labels and things that tend to separate you from things rather than connect you to them. I mean, I know from my own experience as a father with young kids, you know, they look out the window, they point at something and you go, yeah, that's a tree. Kind of boom, that's it. End of experience. End of, it's labeled. What else is there to say? It's a tree. Rather than go into the felt experience of relating to that being of the tree, we put a label on it and park it away somewhere, job done. So language became an abstraction, didn't connect us to the world anymore, but enabled us to categorize things. We saw the rest, came to see the rest of the world around us as separate, as all these different objects with no relationship to them, essentially as dead matter, you know, that we could just exploit for our own ends and our own development. And the body became separated from the mind. So the mind came to see itself as dominant, as superior, and the body was just something, you know, you needed to deal with. There was a bit of a problem on the way, and that we really needed to transcend this materialness, get beyond it, you know, and then we would get to, you know, the heaven that we all are after. So what happens then if we can, in this next phase, connect these two up? So we're not going back to a precognitive reality. We're going transcognitive in a way that reintegrates the earlier precognitive knowing that we had of interconnectedness, of sense of place, of safety and belonging. And if you think about it, how stressed we've become as humanity, because we can't bring ourselves to rest in a container of belonging. That's the body, that's also our felt knowing experience of belonging somewhere on this earth, on this planet, being earthlings, not trying to escape away from the earth to create a new civilization on Mars or something. We are earthlings, we are of the earth has created us. So reintegrating that with all the positive developments that have gone on over the last few thousand years, what might that look like? So our experience of time would essentially be one of being in the present, but noticing how the present is formed from the past and having a sense of the incoming future, but not getting lost in them, always being grounded in the present with a feeling of how the past is informing the moment and what's beginning to crystallize from the future. Abstract rational thought would still play a role, but it wouldn't be leading. Our intuitive felt sense of knowing would lead, because it's from that space that we connect to all the information that's out there. The rational mind, as our scientists have accepted, at the moment can only explain 4% of reality. That other 90%, 96%, they just explain away as dark matter and dark energy. Well, from our intuitive knowing, that's actually much more heart-based, where there are also brain cells, picks up information from the information fields that our normal senses can't see, and therefore our rational mind can't process. So to deal with the complexities that we're facing in the world today, we need to be able to access a bigger spectrum of information, not just what we can see and understand with our rational mind. Because of course, anything that we know is from the past. If you know it, it's come from the past. So we can't base our future purely on what we know from the past, because we know a lot of that's not working. So how do we access intelligence from the future? Well, through the body, which is where you access your knowing of the subtle information fields that are out there. Language would no longer be abstract, although you could use it in that way, but it would be filled with meaning. It would be connected, it would be resonant. We'd find ways to be able to co-create with the rest of life again by using language that connects us to the world around us rather than separates from it. Our understanding of space would be of everything being interconnected, as well as greater differentiation. So it's right, everything has its own unique identity, its unique beauty to it. the same time, it's all interconnected at the same time. And it's alive. The whole thing is alive, as the science is showing us. But we've come to understand or train ourselves to believe it's dead and we can just exploit it. And body would be reintegrated, or be integrated with mind, I should say, for the first time, which means that they would be working in parallel with each other. And that is, I think, the embodiment that we are looking for, but that is really pointing to that disembodiment that happened through the trauma of the split in our earlier collective development. So this phase that we're in now, this challenge that we have, is quite normal in development. I often describe it to people as a tree. It's like when a tree wants to send its branches higher up, we have to dig our roots deeper down for greater stability. So as humanity now searches for what's beyond this current phase that we can feel is not working, we have to sink our roots deeper. And that means encountering our past, reintegrating the past that is holding energy from us. So I explain it like this in evolution theory, which was what my thesis was on. When we have an impulse to grow, to move up, we are bringing in greater consciousness, greater awareness, and the light comes in. You bring in that more light, more consciousness. That light enlightens our shadow, shows us stuff in our subconscious that we weren't able to see before. And we have to be able to reintegrate that before we can actually move on. When we do that, we find we release energy that is needed for us to take that next step. So our future and our past are intrinsically entwined with each other. We don't get this unless we reintegrate that. It takes us beyond this understanding of linear time to a realization that past and future are intrinsically connected through the present moment, and that we are having to go back to a fairly major point in our past now where our energy is being held because of a traumatic phase. And we need that energy now to be able to take this next step to a more conscious phase of interconnectedness and interrelatedness. So, just coming to wrap it up here. This is what we're after then, the full integration of the full scale of who the human being is, from our pre-rational intuitive sensing to the best of our rational knowing, into our trans-rational understanding and experience of reality, which will give us access to working co-creatively with a much bigger spectrum of life than we can see at the moment with our own five senses. That will give us access to what Ken calls the great goddess, the world of subtle energies which enable us to accelerate the solutions, to be able to bring things into the world in a way that's aligned with the rest of life, and in a much faster and simpler way than we are trying to do with our cognitive minds. It gives us access to what's been called the simplicity beyond complexity. Our rational mind creates all sorts of complexity, separates things out, and up to systems thinking that gives itself the illusion that we can understand everything, map it all out, and predict what's going to happen next. Well, there's no way we can do that. That's way beyond our cognitive knowing. Life is far too complex for that, which means we have to get to a sense of knowing beyond the cognitive mind. And that knowing is through our intuition, and intuition comes through the body. So if you are ever doing dowsing, for example, with a pendulum to access information, that is nothing to do with the quality of pendulum. It's not like the nice crystal on the end of the pendulum. It's micro movements in your body. You make an agreement between the mind and the body that, okay, a yes is the pendulum turns this way, and no is it turns that way. You could have, I've got a pendulum somewhere made of a nut and a bolt. It doesn't have to be a beautiful crystal. The point is, what it's doing is it's extending micro movements in your body, because your body is the place that channels the information from those information fields, which is why we have to reintegrate a relationship to the body before we're able to get access to these subtle realms and be able to work co-creatively with them, which is a precondition, I believe, to humanity being able to successfully navigate these next phases.
Thank you, Peter. That was really captured.
Nearly finished, Monica, nearly finished.
Yeah. Okay.
So having said all of that, that was a lot of words. And I'm going to invite you not to necessarily try to understand it all rationally, but to feel into it. This is a lovely quote from Brian Bates's book, The Way of Weird. Weird was the Anglo-Saxon equivalent to chi and things. Okay. He says, words can be potent magic indeed, but they can also enslave us. We grasp from weird tiny puffs of wind. We get little senses and understandings, but we store them in our lungs as words. But we have not thereby captured a piece of reality to be pored over and examined as if it were a glimpse of weird. We may as well mistake our fistfuls of air for wind itself, or a pitcher of water for the stream from which it was dipped. That is the way we're enslaved by our own power to name things. So as much as I've made an attempt to name things here, I'd invite you to try to feel into the story and make it your own felt sense of understanding whether that resonates for you or not. So if you want any follow-up on this, there's got a new book coming out in November called Leading from the Field. There's going to be a launch event that's going to be part of the bonus package for people who sign up. And starting in November, there's an Introduction to Energetics course that'll take us into how do we actually access this realm of the great goddess, as Ken called it, in a way that we can work with our organizations, with nature, with ourselves, constructively with that whole dimension of reality.
Great. We will do the posting the links at the end again.
Right.
And I was really encapsulated all of this. I just love about the rooting and about embodying and just really bringing body and really embodying the future through the body here and now. It was really good. And I love to hear from the participants. So we have about 15 minutes all together time with Peter. You can ask him a question. You can part to the Q&A. Yes. Yeah, put in the Q&A and you know where is it? Yes, it's at the bottom. You should see it and you can put any question you have for Peter. And
so I can see a question here, Monica, from Jonathan.
Yes, please go for it.
Any recommended regular practices that you use to tap into your own intuition more and more? Well, you know, the key first step is to be able to quieten the rational mind, because the rational mind and the intuitive knowing can't coexist in the same moment. I know if we're doing, for example, energy work where we're doing readings on things and you're tuned into your intuitive mind, information comes in, you have to write it down immediately. If you stop to think about it, you click out of the intuitive mind. So, and then you can come back and rationalize it afterwards. So the first thing we have to learn is to be able to quieten the rational mind. And that's what all basic mindfulness practices are there for. Any good meditation practice, whatever fits you and your needs, will help you to start to, in a way, disidentify with that rational mind, not just see yourself as it. It's a very, very simple practice, you know, of noticing what the mind is saying and chatting away. And then, of course, the moment that you notice it, you are no longer only it, because you've become a witness to it, right? So there's something more than that rational mind. And then when you can just sit and watch it in that way, then it starts to quieten down. And that's a discipline, right? That's really a discipline and a practice that one has to adopt first to be able to create space in ourselves for the intuitive knowing beyond the rational mind. And then, you know, as you create that space, there are different methods. I mean, dowsing with a pendulum, you know, is one way of practicing. Muscle testing is another way of practicing and connecting to that knowing. And then there are other practices that are more larger scale practices. For example, I work with a practice called eco-intention, where you work with the energetic architecture of large scale systems. So like large areas of land and organizations, all of whom have an energetic information architecture to them. So it really, anything with a name and a boundary, it has an energy fields to it. And this isn't anything weird. This is like, well, it is weird with a Y, but not with an EI. It's like the light spectrum. Okay, imagine the light spectrum, and we know that we can see some of the light spectrum, but we accept that we can't see a lot more of it. Well, it's the same with all of life, essentially, that the scientists are saying us is basically all information, and then more or less dense information. So there's a certain level of density in the information that means it clicks into the material 3D world that we're so familiar with seeing around us. But that spectrum continues into more subtle levels of information that flow as energy waves, essentially, that you can access through your intuitive knowing. So you're expanding the bandwidth of your knowing. But that information is accessed through your intuitive mind, and therefore through the body. So there are different practices you can find there. But the first thing to do is to really learn to still the rational mind, and then you'll notice that you start to pick up information in other ways than you would otherwise do. And the key is to not edit them, right? To actually allow them to be valid when they come into.
Yeah, Peter, there are a few more questions. I don't know which one you would like to choose, but perhaps how important was the role of language in the separateness of mind versus body?
Yeah, great question. Very important. I mean, it's like there's this beautiful book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, whoever wrote that question may be familiar with. And so alphabet and language emerged at the same time as rational thought in that split. Now, again, it's not a bad thing in itself, but when it loses its context in the body, in the world, in the interconnectedness, then it becomes abstract. And so in that book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, he goes into tracing the whole history of the emergence of alphabet and language in that way, and how that paralleled the disappearance of the feminine, the disappearance of the goddess in the Abrahamic traditions, and this disconnected way of looking at the world, this kind of nearly headless Nick, as it were, way of looking at the world, where the mind becomes disconnected from the body. So absolutely, it plays a key role. So becoming very conscious of language and how we use language is really an important part of the next step. Yeah.
Perhaps here, any recommended practices to rebuild, unearth, and earn back to potential we might have lost or buried under years of witnessing trauma and loss?
Great question there, Suresha. Yeah, I mean, the practice I have found most powerful in that area, and I should say before I get into that, I think Thomas Hübel's work is great in this area, working with trauma and things as well. But the practice that I found most useful was originally called Deep Ecology, and then came on to be called The Work That Reconnects, developed by Joanna Macy and John Seed. So I did most of the works with John Seed, as he calls Deep Ecology, and it's a process of really literally remembering, that we are the earth. And it's crazy that we've forgotten it, but if you really stop and think about it for a moment, like at the moment, I am the earth talking to itself, right? And you're the earth listening to itself. I mean, and we're the earth trying to work out, can this experiment in self-awareness that we as the earth created through humanity, can we continue it? Is it going to work, or is it going to destroy us? And so when we start to remember, put back together, right, remember that we're the earth, then we start to discover some real pain about the fact that we've forgotten that. And there's some beautiful processes called despair and empowerment work, or the Council of All Beings that you do through the Deep Ecology processes that are really, really powerful in connecting to that and enabling that healing to take place. But often it's just a question of sitting with it for a bit and going, oh my word, how did I forget? And when we allow that in, then we start to feel the pain, because how could we, if you think of it from the earth's perspective, this beautiful being that the earth created, you know, as a mother, let's put it that way, forgot and even denied that she was their mother. And not only denied, but then went on to exploit ruthlessly the mother for their own gain, with no sense of gratitude and no sense of the impact that it was having at all. So it's really important to allow that to be present, because it's feeling that pain and dealing with that trauma, bringing that out of our shadow into the light, that in not to feel guilty about it, but just to know that that pain is there, is what allows us come to rest. And it's only when we come to rest and we start to still ourselves and still our minds, that we then do get access to this knowing, and that we get access to the body again. We allow ourselves to sit back, to fall back into the body with a deep breath, you know, of recognition. And so I'd recommend both that work and you know, and I believe Thomas's work is great in that area as well.
There are lots of questions about children, like how to monitor the time when they are completely addicted to screens and losing interest of moving body connection, or any thoughts, ideas of helping kids connected to their felt experience, as you mentioned, like seeing the tree out the window instead of labeling and moving on. Perhaps some your recommendation, your father, how maybe rag player, coach.
Yeah, the screens thing is really hard. I mean, it's, you know, we just make agreements. You have to limit it. And I don't have a problem. I have 3 boys, 17, 15, and 9. And they're all 3 of them play football, soccer. I have no problem if they've been outside and are running around and stuff, and then come in and have an hour or something on the screen in the evening. And it's about making agreements around that and just being really clear on it, you know. The other thing is, when you're out and about, is noticing things and sharing them. So, oh, doesn't the grass smell nice, right, at the moment? Or, oh, notice that kind of flock of birds. Isn't it amazing how they kind of fly together in those formations? A sense of wonder at the world around us, I think is probably the best gift we can give the kids, so that they become curious, right? That they don't just see it as something, as just this object out there. And also, you know, just in the way you treat nature around you, the things that you feel that are important, you know, noticing, you know, engaging with the way you engage with animals, plants, trees, etc. That's the best thing, is just to be an example of that, and don't, you know, not as anything weird, just as normal. I mean, these are all living beings. They have their own fields, as we know from plant intelligence. Plants pick up our thoughts and feelings. You know, the research that, as if you, my friend here, if I was to start to think the thought that I was going to burn one of these leaves of the plant, you'd be able to pick up a reaction from the plant before I'd even done the act, just thinking about it. That's all kind of scientifically proven now. But we forget still that that plant is now picking up information from me here. And in fact, what they've also researched is, and I've had this plant, you know, a long time, is that when somebody has a relationship with a plant, as it were, for a longer time, and then you go out and about, if you have like a scary experience out there, the plant will pick it up. So they'll be able to measure a reaction in the plant, even though you may be, you know, however many miles away. So we just need to remember that it is all interconnected, and then start to behave in that way. And that's what will be the best example to our kids.
There is another good question, maybe the simplest exercise to speak to your body when you are just beginning to practice, like for really like beginner who has no idea. What would you maybe advise?
To speak to your body?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, just say hello. It's really simple. But like, as you get a feeling in your body, you notice it. Don't push away from it, even if it feels like a scary feeling. Let's say your heart, you know, something starts to go, around your heart or something, you go, oh, hello.
Mhm.
Hello, what's that? And so you recognize that you build a relationship with it. If you kind of go, oh my word, well, it's really scary, or maybe there must be something wrong with me, then you push away from it and you increase the tension or something. So listening, a hello, and then a kind of, oh, I wonder what's this got to tell me, and just waiting to see what answer you get. It's really very, very simple. This isn't complicated. The rational mind makes things complicated. It's very simple. You just listen. If you notice something, you say hello to it, and you wait to see what happens. Without judgment. That's the key thing, to have suspended judgment, just to be listening with an open heart to whatever's going on, and noticing that, and then you'll notice that you start to build a more conscious relationship with the body that actually becomes a very valuable source of information for you. That you'll notice when something happens, oh, that's maybe I need to pay attention to that, what's going on, and you'll notice that it's a sign that something's happening around you, or you need to pay attention to something specific. It's an extremely complex organism, an extremely highly sensitive organism, the body. It's got information like fields all around it that's interacting with the world around us, So the more we can become aware of that, the more information we're going to pick up if we choose to. And this is the thing that we need to be very clear on, what do we want to know and what not, because ultimately all information is accessible to us. So with the clarity of question, we have these gating mechanisms that keep most of it shut off from us, so we go crazy and not being able to do anything. So being grounded again and being clear on what it is you want to know will help you get the information that you need.
There is last question, but it's just very short one. What is the role of women and men in the next phase? But it's just really 1 minute for this one.
Well, there's women and men, and there's masculine and feminine, right? And both men and women have both the masculine and the feminine. So what's going to be key in the next phase is the integration of them. And really the reintegration of the feminine to be a complementarity to the masculine, which means the masculine can relax a bit, right? Doesn't have to be in control of everything and know what's going to happen next and be on top of it all, But when we reintegrate that feminine, the masculine can relax, and then they can have a very beautiful co-creative dance to hopefully build this future, that we're all looking for.
Thank you, Peter, so much. I just want to mention the next session in the channel will be with Dr. Andrea Pennington, and it will call How to Overcome Imposter Syndrome and Live Your Authentic Self. And before you go, I just want to mention there's a created private Facebook group. You can chat there. There is a link in the course environment you can find. And also there is so many information. Peter was really, I just felt like I need to listen again and again and digest. And we offer that because you can watch these 48 hours, but if you want to upgrade and listen, really digest in your own time and help us and help other people who can actually watch for free, you can upgrade. That would be amazing. And perhaps, Peter, would you like to share where we can find you? You already shared the book, but maybe where people can find more about you? Like
I had that this follow-up screen here.
Yeah. Oh, you prepared. Well done.
That just there's some websites you can go to. The new book that's about how, as leaders, we can work more consciously with the subtle informational realms. That's coming out towards the end of November. And there's the energetics course as well that goes into a lot more detail, obviously, in any of this, if anybody's interested. Otherwise, feel free to connect me through any of the sites there. The Ubiverse, which is the bottom there, is a free social platform for change makers. So it's a kind of alternative to Facebook. It's about 14,000 people on there, 1,200 organizations, all of whom are aligned around making a positive difference in the world. So if you want a social platform where we don't steal your data, et cetera, then feel free to join us on the Ubiverse and find some like-minded souls there.
Yeah, you can take picture probably as the best way. And Peter, any like a last advice or any like a top tip to stay embodied?
Slow down. slow down and rest and just start to feel into what I was talking about, that relationship, that remembering, right, of who we are as the earth. We're an expression of the earth. Remembering that'll help to kind of settle the rest of it down and really bring us into the body and deal with the pain so we can get access to the promise.
Yeah, people, thank you so much, everyone. We can maybe read later, but the portal was very good. And yes, such a dense and rich information. We listen again. I will definitely listen again. And was very rich. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining us. Please find Peter on his page, read his book. I'm going definitely Why Work. That's really resonate with me. I love this title. And yeah, there is next session within 1 hour. Please join us. And if you want to upgrade, please go. Embodiment Conference. Yes, there is a link and coffee breaks. Please, if you want to feel a chat, you want to more digest, talk about what you have heard, there is a coffee breaks, all links, our Zoe put it there. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, have a blessed day. Enjoy the routine. I just really felt I need to stretch as well, and anything what you need to do, and stay connected. Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
Good.
Thank everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.